Good morning everyone and welcome to the Cabinet meeting. I'm Councillor Amanda Hopgood, Leader of Durham County Council and Chair of this meeting. The meeting is being broadcast live through our YouTube channel. And before we commence with today's formal business, if I could cover some of the housekeeping issues for us all to follow, please. If you could switch off or make silent your mobile phones and any other devices. Keep your microphones switched off at all times unless invited to speak by myself as the Chair. And when invited to speak, please switch on the microphone nearest to you and introduce yourself. So with that, I'll move on to the agenda. Item 1 is public questions. We've received one public question for today's meeting from Mr. Roger Cornwall. Mr. Cornwall, can I invite you please to ask your question?
Thank you, Chair. At its meeting on the 6th of April 2022, this Cabinet agreed to consult on the second draft of the County Durham Parking and Accessibility Supplementary Planning Document, or SPD. This consultation ended on the 7th of June 2022. The supporting information for the consultation said it was expected to be adopted in the autumn under delegated powers. This has not happened, and it's not on the agenda for this morning's meeting. There are planning applications going through where parking provision is a consideration, and having an adopted SPD will be more relevant and material than the interim document currently available. So, two related questions. What is the reason for the delay, and when will this SPD be adopted? Thank you.
Thank you. Can I invite Councillor Elizabeth Scott, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Economy and Partnerships, to respond to the question, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the questions, Roger. There was substantial feedback received from stakeholders as part of the second consultation on the Parking and Accessibility SPD in June 2022. Within the responses, different perspectives on the quantum of parking spaces required on both commercial and residential development sites were noted. Getting the parking provision correct on new developments requires striking a delicate balance between the needs of different stakeholders. For example, on residential developments, the Council must consider the needs of residents who require sufficient secure off-street parking and the needs of residents moving around developments, including those with mobility issues. The Council must also consider the designs required by developers to make new housing attractive and viable, as well as providing sufficient space for service and delivery vehicles. Members and officers are taking time to understand the different stakeholder perspectives in the consultation responses and the implications of the proposed guidelines on development viability. This measured response is to ensure that the most appropriate future standards for the county will be adopted. And as to when that will be, a report will be brought back to Cabinet seeking approval once we're confident that we have the correct parking guidelines to meet the needs of residents, stakeholders and developers for future years. But I will make sure that that is progressed up the agenda, Roger. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scott. Thank you, Chair. Could I have that in writing, please?
Yeah, we'll get the response to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Item 2 is the minutes. Can I please have a mover and a seconder to the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of January?
Move, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Shuttleworth.
Second those minutes, Chair.
Thank you. Can we agree the minutes are a correct record? Okay, I can confirm therefore the minutes are agreed. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from members? No. Item 4, the medium-term financial plan 2023-24 to 2026-27 and the revenue and capital budget 2023-24 for the report of the Corporate Director of Resources. Can I please ask Paul Darby to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. Paul Darby, the Corporate Director of Resources. This report presents the budget proposals for 23-24, both revenue and capital, and our medium-term financial plan forecast for the period 23-24 to 26-27. As it is the budget report, there are a number of statutory requirements that wrap around the budget setting process, which are addressed in the report and require Cabinet and Council approval. And these include the pay policy, which is a requirement of the Localism Act and sets out our arrangements for Chief Officer's pay and how this relates to the lowest paid employees, and that's attached at Appendix 13. our Treasury Management Strategy and Prudential Indicators, which are attached at Appendix 14, and also attaches the Council's Property Investment Strategy, which we review on an annual basis and is attached at Appendix 15. The budgets have been prepared against a backdrop of significant inflationary and demographic pressures next year and significant uncertainty that exists beyond 24-25 in terms of government funding levels. The report takes into account the autumn statement announcements and the local government finance settlements for 23-24 published last year, and for which Cabinet have previously received a detailed analysis of the impacts of these announcements. Members will recall that the Fair Funding Review has been deferred until at least 25-26, as has the adult social care reforms and the proposed changes to charging arrangements, the cap on care costs and the implementation of the National Fair Cost of Care exercise. The budget proposals in this report will be considered by full Council on the 22nd of February, and they build on the previous reports considered by Cabinet in July and October of last year and in January this year. As members will see, the report is very comprehensive. It includes a detailed overview of the provisional local government finance settlement impacts on the Council, including analysis of core spending power announcements, the increase in the referendum limit for core council tax increases, and the additional flexibility in terms of the adult social care precept over the next 2 years. Members will note that there is an additional £39.8 million of grant funding being provided to the Council next year. However, £2.5 million of this is recycled specific grant funding we currently receive, meaning that the net new additional grant funding to be received next year is £37.3 million, with £4.3 million of this coming with new spending requirements. Whilst our core spending power increase is above the national average next year, this factors in an assumed 4.99% increase in the council tax, and despite our increase being above the national average, the Council still lags well behind the national average in terms of core spending power per dwelling, and this is exemplified in paragraph 60 of the report. The report sets out in some detail the financial pressures we are facing and the growth that is needed in the budget next year to meet these unavoidable budget pressures linked to inflation, particularly for pay, adult social care costs linked to the national living wage increases, and for increased costs of energy, and also demographic pressures that continue in our children and young people services, in particular linked to looked after children and in our home to school transport budgets. These unavoidable cost pressures total £78.9 million as set out at section 155 of the report. Despite the challenging conditions in terms of construction price inflation and increased costs of borrowing, the MTFP does include £121.9 million of new additional capital expenditure plans, taking the overall capital programme to just over £778 million over the next 4 years. The capital programme, including details of the new additions to the programme and the capital financing requirements linked to the programme, are set out in sections 203 to 224, with the updated capital strategy and details of the individual schemes set out at appendices 9, 10 and 11. The Council's net budget requirement next year will be £519.973 million, and details of the financing of this are set out at section 165, with the gross and net expenditure for each service group included in Appendix 6, and the 23-24 revenue budget broken down by expenditure type at Appendix 7. In terms of council tax increases for 23-24, the budget includes a 2.99% increase in the core council tax next year, plus a 2% adult social care precept, meaning that the overall increase will be 4.99% next year. The increase in 24-25 is also modelled at 4.99%, with further increases of 2.99% assumed in years 3 and 4 of the MTFP planning period. The 23-24 budget proposals and the MTFP planning assumptions are in line with the Government's expectations with regards to council tax. Failure to increase the council tax next year would effectively more than double the budget deficit we face. This would not be a strategy I would recommend to Cabinet or Council, as it would create a significant and unwarranted budget challenge. Every 1% of council tax increase generates circa £2.55 million of additional resources to help balance the budget, or to put it another way, if the Council does not maximise its council tax raising capacity, then the budget deficit will grow by £2.55 million for every 1% below the thresholds set and assumed by central government. It is for these reasons, as a Section 151 officer, recommend to Cabinet and to Council that the increases factored into the 23-24 budgets and the MTFP forecasts are given very serious consideration, given the impacts of not doing so. In considering these proposals, I would highlight, and the report draws attention to this, that the most financially vulnerable residents in the county are afforded significant protection here in Durham through our council tax reduction scheme. And next year, both working age and pension age claimants on partial council tax reduction will receive additional top-up support. The updated policy to implement this additional support is appended at the report at Appendix 3. The budget proposals include new savings of $12.383 million next year and total $18.261 million over the 4-year period. Details of the savings included in the budget next year are set out from sections 226 to 255, with details of individual proposals for the next 4 years included at Appendix 5. There is an impact assessment summarised in sections 250 to 278, with more detail of that impact assessment set out at Appendix 12. The updated MTFP model, which brings all this together, is set out at Appendix 8. Members will note that even after the proposed increase in council tax are factored in and the £12.383 million of savings are taken, there is still a budget deficit of £10.231 million next year, which will need to be met from the MTFP support reserve. Members will also note that there is a funding gap of just under £23.4 million across the remaining years of the MTFP. The risk assessment that underpins the budget and the MTFP forecast is set out at section 287 of the report. Of particular concern is the significant uncertainty beyond 24-25, with more difficult financial settlements widely expected from government from 25-26 onwards, when the Chancellor will face some very tough choices over taxation levels and public expenditure restraint, given the level of borrowing nationally at this time. If public spending reductions are implemented from 25-26 and local government remains unprotected from these, then the forecasts included in this medium-term financial plan, which currently assume a cash limit position, a cash flat position, will need to be revised. The budget and the wider MTFP strategy presented in this report has been subject to extensive consultation via our area action partnerships, through meetings arranged with our partners, trade unions and with business ratepayers. Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board have met on several occasions to discuss the MTFP process and met on the 23rd of January to consider the MTFP update report presented to Cabinet in January last year, and the outcome of those discussions have been factored into this report. The Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Management Board will meet again on the 10th of February to consider this report, and their views on this report will be factored into the report that's presented to Council on the 22nd of February. The report includes details of the various dedicated schools block funding allocations, and these are set out at sections 291 to 323. Of particular note is the increase in the schools block funding allocation next year, which has been increased by £19 million. However, once the supplementary funding received in the current year is excluded, the year-on-year real terms increase is more like £8.5 million. The updated schools formula factors are set out as paragraph 303 and are in line with the local formula agreed by Cabinet last month. In addition to this, our schools will benefit from additional supplementary funding next year through the Mainstream Schools Additional Grant, with our schools expected to receive around £13 million of additional funding this coming year also. High needs block funding is set to increase by £9.4 million next year, a year-on-year increase of just under 12%. As members will be aware, this is an area of our budget that has been under significant pressure for a number of years now. Finally, Chair, I note that there are a series of detailed recommendations embedded within the report, with a summary of the recommendations to be made to Council set out at section 47. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Paul. Can I invite Councillor Richard Bell, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Finance, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank the Director and all the officers for this report, which is the culmination of a huge amount of work and is the fourth and final report that we'll consider on our 23-24 budget proposals and MTFP 13 forecasts in advance of the budget meeting of full Council on 22nd of February. It includes a comprehensive overview of the budget pressures we are facing, the announcements made in the autumn statement in November and the provisional local government finance settlement published in December. The 23-24 budgets need to make provision for significant inflationary pressures, including the impact of Consumer Price Index and the national living wage increases next year, which will have a significant bearing on our adult social care contracts in particular. As one would expect, the cost pressures in adult and children's social care, which are by far the largest budgets the Council has, are enormous and unavoidable. The cost pressures in these two areas, excluding pay inflation, total £30.4 million next year. The additional revenue generated from an adult social care precept and specific grant funding for these areas falls well short of the cost pressures we face, in part due to our low tax raising capacity, a matter I have consistently raised with Government, most recently in the Council's feedback on the Provisional Local Government Finance Settlement. As I outlined last month, we are also seeing significant and enduring cost pressures in our home-to-school transport budgets, which will need a budget increase of £8.3 million next year. While still a significant sum, the budget pressures we face from gas and electricity price increases have subsided from our previous estimates, with provision of £6 million for growth now included next year, £3 million less than we were facing a few months ago. In overall terms, we face spending pressures totalling £78.9 million next year, which includes around £19.5 million for pay inflation, with £7 million of this relating to the shortfall in the current budget following the local government pay award this year. So I would ask Cabinet to note in particular that the vast majority of our budgetary pressures are inflationary and demand-driven and not choices that we have made. The budget does, however, include an ambitious capital programme with £122 million of new investment adults added, including further significant investment in our schools, including new builds, in our highways infrastructure, including a major investment on the A690, and in our towns and villages, bringing the total capital programme to £778 million over the next 4 years and building on the significant planned investments in our leisure centres and other buildings. This is by far the largest level of capital investment this Council has seen and will stretch us to the maximum in terms of capacity to deliver. The autumn statement announcements and the local government finance settlement last year, including the additional council tax raising powers we have been provided with, and the delay in the implementation of the adult social care reforms, are all to be welcomed. Without these, what is a difficult financial position we are dealing with would have been an impossible position requiring significant cuts to public services. The additional funding being provided by Government next year, where we will receive an additional £37.3 million of funding, plus the council tax raising powers we will have, will undoubtedly help us in addressing the significant cost pressures we are dealing with. It is to be welcomed that the increase in our core spending power of 10.3% next year is higher than the 9.2% national average increase, though disappointingly we still lag behind the national average core spending power per dwelling, mainly due to our inherent low tax raising capacity. The uncertainty from 25-26 onwards continues to cast a shadow over our medium-term financial planning, and depending how things turn out, there are significant challenges to come in 25-26 and beyond, but this is something we must plan for. The savings proposals we are considering today are largely in line with the proposals we considered in October last year and January, but have been amended to include the withdrawal of the free after two parking initiative for on-street parking only. I would thank everyone involved in the consultation that has been undertaken this year. The feedback we have received, as updated by the deliberations of the Corporate and Overview and Scrutiny Management Board, is set out in detail in the report and has been carefully considered in finalising the plans included at Appendix 5. The total savings identified across the MTF P13 planning period are £18.261 million, with £12.383 million, that's 68%, falling into next year. The budget proposals include council tax increases in line with the government's expectations. They take into account and adopt the new council tax core referendum limits, which have been increased to 2.99% from next year, and the adult social care precepting powers are an additional 2% next year and the year after, making a total of 4.99%. The clear expectation from Government is that these additional flexibilities are taken, and as we have heard, the strong recommendation from our Section 1.5 officer is that this is taken. Assuming that this Council agrees the council tax increases factor into this report and the updated savings proposals delivered, then the budget shortfall next year will be £10.231 million, rising to £23.38 million over the 4-year planning period. As is always the case, estimates beyond next year are more indicative and uncertain and will undoubtedly change, and then therefore is significant uncertainty over the funding settlements beyond 24-25. Both of these factors could materially change the medium-term forecasts. We will therefore have to be continue to be flexible and agile in our approach in terms of planning for the next 4 financial years so that we can continue to support residents of County Durham in the best way we can. Work has already started on developing options to address these challenges so that we can consider what further savings will be required in 24-25 and beyond, and we will need to consider this in the summer. A 4.99% increase in our council tax next year represents an increase of around £1.12 to £1.50 per week for the majority of households across the county, with those on low incomes fully protected through our local council tax reduction scheme. Following the receipt of an additional £1.44 million of grant from central government, I welcome the additional top-up proposals set out in this report to provide additional payments to those households, both working age and those of pension age who are in receipt of partial local council tax reduction support but are still left with a bill to pay. This is detailed in paragraphs 174 to 176. Government are clearly expecting local authorities such as ourselves to increase council tax in line with the new flexibilities that have been given to us to help fund local services and in particular social care. It is important that we follow the advice of our Section 151 officer in terms of the sufficiency of our reserves. At Q2, our earmarked and cash limit reserves were forecast to reduce by 45 million to just under 191 million, and our general reserve was forecast to reduce to 21.3 million. This is below the minimum threshold agreed by Council in February last year. Next month, Cabinet will receive an updated forecast based on the Q3 position, and I am not expecting the position to have improved. Indeed, it may well have deteriorated. It is simply not sustainable to underpin the budget indefinitely from reserves, as we will need to address the underlying budget position and ensure that we can live within our means. That said, utilising the medium-term financial plan reserve next year will buy us some time to develop proposals that will minimise as far as possible the impact on frontline service delivery. As the Corporate Director has mentioned, this report also includes the updated pay policy, our updated Treasury management strategy and prudential indicators, and our updated property investment strategy. These are important documents, and adopting these various policies and strategies is integral to us meeting our statutory requirements in terms of budget setting. With that, Chair, I am happy to move the report and the recommendations as set out in paragraph 47.
Thanks, Richard. Can I also thank our officers for the work undertaken to prepare the 2023-24 budget proposals and the MTFP 13 update report, which we're considering today, and to Councillor Bell and others for their contributions. As has been highlighted, our budget next year is dominated by unavoidable inflationary pressures. However, in that context, we have still been able to set a balanced budget and in doing so accommodate a substantial capital programme, the largest this Council has ever had, and a clear demonstration of the scale of ambition of the Joint Administration. At each stage, we have sought to involve scrutiny in the budget setting process, and the report includes details of the feedback from those meetings and from wider engagement through our area action partnerships and through engagement with business ratepayers and with trade unions on the budget strategy and savings proposals. It is frustrating that we still lag behind the national average core spending power per dwelling, and as the report outlines, if we had the funding in line with the national average per dwelling, be it from national government grant or from council tax revenues, then we would have a further £42 million available to us next year. Alas, we don't. As I said last month, the scale of the challenges we face in terms of the unavoidable cost pressures we are experiencing from inflationary increases in pay, energy, waste and transport contracts, from the impact of national living wage increases and from enduring cost and demographic pressures in our looked after children and in our home to school transport budgets are unprecedented and should not be understated. The overall position as presented here has improved slightly since the previous forecasts, but we are still faced with using in excess of £10 million of our reserves to balance our budgets next year, even after, as the Government fully expects us to do, we increase the council tax by the maximum permitted without a referendum. There remains significant uncertainty over the funding we will receive beyond 2025-26, and this, together with unavoidable inflationary and demographic pressures in our budgets, remains a significant risk in our MTFP planning and budget setting in future years. Utilising over £10 million of reserves to balance the budget next year is clearly not a sustainable position to be in and can only be accommodated on a short-term basis. Increasing the council tax is a decision that should not be taken lightly, and we must recognise a squeeze on the cost of living at this time. However, not increasing council tax is simply not a sustainable or prudent strategy to adopt and would not be in line with the government's expectations and in line with the advice from our Section 151 officer. If we didn't increase council tax, our 2023-24 budget and medium-term financial planning position would be much worse. In the absence of more funding being made available by government, it effectively becomes a binary choice of implementing council tax increases versus increasing the cuts to vital public services. It is important, however, to recognise that those on low incomes in County Durham are afforded significant protection through access to support through our council tax reduction scheme. And I am pleased that County Council unanimously endorsed the continuation of our scheme into next year, which, unlike virtually every other council in the country, does not seek to limit or cap the level of support working-age households can receive. In addition, those residents in receipt of partial council tax reduction but still left with a bill to pay will receive additional support next year, utilising some additional funding provided by the government and our own reserves, with working age claimants receiving up to £110 of additional top-up support and pension age claimants receiving up to £50 of additional support, significantly more than up to £25 each that the government expects us to provide. The report sets out details of the other support available to financially vulnerable households through our welfare assistance scheme and through discretionary housing payments and other initiatives that we invest in, including our support to the advice sector and through our welfare rights service as part of our poverty strategy and action plan commitments. Having implemented the review of reserves that was set out in the January Cabinet report, we have now increased the corporate capacity to be able to balance budgets in the coming years. It is important that we follow the advice of our Section 151 officer in terms of the adequacy of our reserves, and I fully support the proposals set out in the last report to this regard. As I have consistently said across the last 9 months, it is more important than ever that we have a well-managed medium-term financial planning process. We need to ensure we plan sufficiently well ahead, that we take the tough decisions on council tax and on savings, and that we do not use reserves to unsustainable levels going forward. With that, I would ask Cabinet to note the report and agree the recommendations set out at paragraph 47. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the report, please? Councillor Shuttleworth.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Councillor John Shuttleworth, Cabinet Member for Rural Communities and Highways. I just want to make a few comments on the report. We can see every day how we're faced with financial challenges at present, not only for council budgets, of course, but for all the people who live and work in the towns and villages right across our county, including our most rural areas, where cost increases for transport and fuel, for example, have a huge impact. If we are to do our best as a council for all people, then we must present a balanced budget that focuses on our priorities in the county. I believe that this is what we have presented here today. It's not a wish list of the unobtainable, and we have had to cut our cloth to fit the resources available. But what has come out of this is a medium-term financial plan that puts us in a much better position than many of the councils across the country, and certainly across the North East. I would particularly like to mention the ongoing priority, which Richard mentioned before, about the A690 and the long-standing issues there. Money has been put aside for this, and we're not afraid to make bold decisions where they're in the best interest of the county. And this is one example, because it's the main road into Durham City. Chair, I just want to thank all the officers, Paul, Richard and everybody, for all the hard work they put into this, and just want to give my support to the recommendations in the report. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Councillor Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. I'd like to thank officers and the rest of Cabinet as well for all the good work that's going on. And I believe this budget is a robust budget. The public would expect us to use some reserves at these difficult times, which we're doing, and they'd expect us to look at how to generate more income too, and we're doing that. and they'd expect us to look for savings whilst protecting frontline services, and we're also doing that. We're seeing across the country councils in serious trouble. We've worked hard over the last year or so to remove waste and manage the council better than the previous administration did, and we're in a better position as a result. However, even with savings, use of reserves and income generation, we're still having to ask residents for a core council tax rise of 2.99% and have to look for savings in the 2024-25 budget too. It's very clear to me that the council tax system is completely broken, and we need to look for some kind of proportional system, as councillors supported at the last full council meeting. And this rests with government. All colours of government over the last 30 years have resisted this reform. We're now at a point where it's not sustainable for funding to continue in the same manner. Government has to stump up extra funding or reform funding. Just making councils increase the social care precept by 2%, for example, it's not acceptable, and it's not sufficient to address inflation running at double-digit levels in many services. The National Pay Agreement, which is completely out of our control, is increasing council costs by more than the amount that we can increase council tax. Our energy bills have risen by more than we can increase council tax. Our children's services costs are rising by many times the amount that we can increase council tax. The extra funding from government is welcome, but an additional £2 billion provided to local government would have helped every council address shortfalls. Compare that to the hundreds of billions given out during COVID, some of it squandered, and the tens of billions more being spent helping with energy bills. And it does beg the question, why, when we're spending £1 trillion a year as a country, can't the government fund local government at a fair level? This would avoid the massive knock-on impacts which underfunding of core services cause. Not funding councils properly will cost the country billions more in the long run. Chair, this budget shows that as a joint administration working with officers, we're making the right decisions, protecting services, making savings, raising income, using reserves, and doing all of this whilst keeping the overall cost to the public in these times of high inflation at reasonable levels. I'm happy to support taking this to full council, but reiterate that government needs to listen, because there's no magic money tree in local government, and levelling up cannot happen if core services are impacted in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mark. Is anyone else wishing to speak? Cabinet member? No. Can we agree the report and its recommendations, please? Agreed. Thank you. I confirm the recommendations are agreed. Items 5, school admission arrangements, academic year 2024 to 25. If I can ask Martin Stenton, Head of Early Help, Inclusion and Vulnerable Children, to present the report, please.
Thank you. This report details our school admission arrangements for academic year 24-25. It's a mandatory requirement of the National School Admissions Code that all schools must have admission arrangements that clearly set out how children will be admitted. This includes the criteria that will be applied if there are more applications than places at the school. The local authority is the admission authority for community and voluntary controlled schools, while the governing body is the admission authority for voluntary aided and foundation schools and the relevant trust for an academy or free school. All admission authorities must agree admission arrangements annually. However, if there are no changes proposed, they will need to be consulted on at least every 7 years. The current admission arrangements were consulted on between October and December 2022. There is no need to consult this year other than where it is proposed that some community and voluntary controlled schools have a reduction in the admission number. The proposed admission number for each community and voluntary controlled school is detailed in Appendix 2 to the report. Chair, there are 3 recommendations in this report. We're asking that the proposed admission numbers as recommended in Appendix 2 for community and voluntary control schools are approved, that the admission numbers advised by governing bodies of voluntary aided schools and academies be noted, and that the admission arrangements document, which is covered in Appendix 3, also be approved. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Martin. Can I invite Councillor Ted Henderson, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Children and Young People's Services, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to present this report to the Council. Proposed administration arrangements for the 2024-25 year. These arrangements have been produced following a consultation with schools, other admission authorities, governing bodies and the parents. There were no changes proposed to the admission arrangements approved for 23-2024, apart from to admission numbers for a small number of schools and academies. The admission arrangements ensure that as many parents as possible are provided with a place at one of their preferred schools. Durham regularly achieves in excess of 92% of pupils receiving their first preference of primary and secondary school. This comfortably exceeds the first preference percentage met by the other councils, both in the regional and the nationally. Education remains a key priority to the council, and the positive outcome we seek to achieve are contributed to by pupils being provided with places in schools where parents and carers want them to attend. I recommend the report and the decision to ask the Cabinet to agree. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ted. Can I invite Councillor John Shuttleworth, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Rural Communities and Highways, to speak to the report, please?
Thanks, Chair. The admission arrangements outlined in the report are quite clear, easy to understand, and therefore will help parents and carers when deciding which schools they'd prefer their child to attend. It's pleasing to note the Council continues to enable a high percentage of pupils to be offered a place at the preferred school. And on the basis of that, I'd just like to second the report, Chair. Thanks.
Thanks, John. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Can we agree the report and its recommendations? Okay, can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. Item 6, Council Plan 2023-24 to 2026-27, the refresh and report of the Chief Executive. Can I extend a warm welcome to Steve Evans, our new Head of Corporate Affairs, to his first meeting of Cabinet. Steve, can I ask you to present the report, please?
Good morning and thank you, Chair. I'll not introduce myself again. You've done a good job of that. Thank you very much. Before I present the report, I'd just like to put on the record my thanks to Andy Palmer, who was the Head of Policy Planning Performance, retired in late January, and is largely responsible for the content of this report. The report seeks Cabinet endorsement for the updated Council Plan, which covers the period 2023 to 2027, and which, subject to your approval, would be presented to Council on 22nd of February for final sign-off and approval. The plan itself is attached to Appendix 2 of the report. The current plan was put together and approved by Council in June last year, and it reflected the period following the elections in May 21 and the movement into the post-pandemic world and the shifting priorities there. The plan sets out the Council's ambitions and desired outcomes and the actions that the Council is going to take in terms of delivering those. It also provides a range of contextual information about the county and about some of the opportunities and challenges that it faces and how we're going to deal with those. Importantly, the plan aligns fully with the medium-term financial plan that you heard about earlier on this morning, and it also embeds actions around our equalities duties, which means we are in compliance with the Equalities Act of 2010. If I just say a few words about the structure of the actual plan, it's very much linked also to the County Vision 2035 and the three main priorities that sit within that. And just to remind members, that's more and better jobs, people living longer and independent lives, and connected communities. Our council plan picks up those three themes in large part, and our role in delivering them under the headings our economy, our people, and our communities. In addition, there's two other priority areas: our environment, which was a new addition into last year's plan, which reflects the elevated importance and significance of our actions in tackling climate change in light of declarations made by this council. And the Our Council priority, which picks up the excellent council ambition and actions. I'll just say a few words as well about how we're going to measure performance going forward. The plan sets out our aspirations in each area and is underpinned by a set of performance indicators. These will be reported back through Cabinet and also through thematic overview and scrutiny committees going forward, so there'll be absolute transparency in terms of our progress in terms of meeting those priorities. So the recommendations are set out in paragraph 9 of the report, which are for the Council to consider, which are for Cabinet, Cabinet to consider the updated Council Plan 23-27 and to agree for it to be presented to Council on the 22nd of February for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Can I also thank Steve and Andy Palmer, the team and all the officers involved in updating the Council Plan. The Council is responsible for a wide range of public services and has a significant role to play in improving the lives of everyone who lives in, visits or works in County Durham. We know that our county has both opportunities and issues that need to be addressed. Many of the issues facing our residents cannot be solved by the Council alone, so it is important that we work in partnership with others across the public, private, voluntary and community sectors, that collectively we acknowledge and understand the challenges our communities face, that we are ambitious in our approach and that we take difficult decisions to tackle difficult issues and that we demonstrate clear community leadership. It is vital that we listen to our communities and to our partners and to ensure that we build collective understanding and community cohesion and focus on the things that matter the most to our residents and to our local businesses. This report sets out details of the updated Council Plan covering the period 2023 to 27. It does not and could not include a list of everything we do and is underpinned by a wide range of specific strategies and service-specific action plans. The plan sets out the Council's ambitions, its desired outcomes and its actions to deliver on these alongside a range of performance measures to track the performance of the Council's services. It is an important document as it sets the Council's priorities and directs our resources. In June last year, Council agreed an updated and refreshed Council Plan and agreed to refresh and update it on an annual basis going forward. Presented to County Council alongside the MTFP and budget setting reports in February, this is what this report does. The overall style and tone of the document is in line with the plan we agreed in June last year and is fully aligned with and complements the MTFP we have just considered. The Council Plan ensures that our resources are used in a transparent and effective way by setting out our priorities to support our economy, our environment and our communities, and to further improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the Council for everyone's benefit. Over the last year, we've been focusing on the development of the inclusive economy, culminating in Cabinet agreeing the Inclusive Economic Strategy in December last year, a document which will provide a platform to shape economic development for years to come. We have also provided a greater focus on our environment, as demonstrated by the declaration of an ecological emergency last year, and the more stretching carbon reduction targets we agreed as part of the updated Climate Emergency Response Plan. In the last year, we have sold a building on the Sands in Durham City and agreed an alternative strategy for the location of the Council's headquarters functions. We have progressed the reopening of the DLI building, made significant strides forward in terms of turning the redevelopment of Akeley Heads from a concept into a reality through meaningful market engagement and more detailed options appraisals. We can all be rightly proud of our county, our heritage, our people and our culture. Moving forward, we will need to maintain sound management of our resources in delivering on our ambitions and priorities, seek to maximise the talents of our people and use technology to provide the best services possible within the resources available. With that, I move the Cabinet notes and agrees the report and its recommendations set out in paragraph 9 and endorse that the report and plan be presented to Council to approve on the 22nd of February. I can invite Councillor Richard Bell to second the report, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would formally second the report and in so doing ask all directors and Cabinet members to have it in regard when discharging their duties. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is anyone else wishing to speak on this? Okay. Can we agree that the refreshed council plan be considered by council on the 22nd of February? Yeah, thank you. Confirm that's agreed. Item 7. Developer viability, affordable housing and financial contributions. Housing needs, design code, trees, woodlands and hedges, supplementary planning documents. Can I ask Amy Horhoff, Corporate Director of Regeneration, Economy and Growth, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody. The purpose of this report is to seek Cabinet's approval to commence the consultation on the second draft of the Developer Contributions Supplementary Planning Document and for the first draft of the Housing Needs, County Durham Design Code and Trees and Woodland and Hedges Supplementary Planning Documents. At the meeting of the 21st of October 2020, the County Council adopted the County Durham Plan. In order to provide more detailed guidance and advice and policies in the County Durham Plan, government guidance allows that SPDs, known as supplementary planning documents, are capable of being material consideration in planning decisions, but are not part of the development plan. I will now run through the scope of each of our supplementary planning documents in turn. So firstly, the Development Viability, Affordable Housing and Financial Contributions SPD. This document is for the Developer Viability, Housing and Financial Contributions Supplementary Planning Document, and it includes guidance relating to affordable housing, older persons housing, green infrastructure, education provision, health provision and biodiversity net gain. It also sets out the Council's requirements for submissions of site-specific viability appraisals and the information and evidence required to support such assessments. This is the second draft of the document, and some of the key changes from the first draft are set out in paragraph 13 of this report. The next supplementary planning document for consideration is the Housing Needs SPD. This sets out the guidance relating to a number of housing-related policies in the County Durham Plan, and including implementation of the M4 Accessible and Adaptable Housing Standard, guidance on multi-generational homes, an overview of the factors and evidence that would be expected to be considered as part of a local area housing need assessment. It sets out the PBSA needs, and it also includes how to apply the nationally described space standards in residential uses and care homes. Finally, it includes guidance on the requirement for first homes. The third document is our County Durham Design Code SPD. The County Durham Design Code SPD sets down guidance for ensuring development is well designed and better suited to the local context. It articulates how development should reflect its local context and applicable to all scales and types of development. The SPD will be supported by settlement charter studies which provide key evidence base for understanding the history and character of our settlements. And the final SPD for consideration today is the Trees, Woodland and Hedges SPD. The Trees, Woodland and Hedges SPD sets out to ensure that trees, woodland and hedges are fully considered as part of the planning process, including retaining them in new development, protecting them during construction and setting out circumstances where we will use tree preservation orders. The consultation, if agreed, will commence from the 21st of February to the 11th of April 2023. The consultation will be undertaken in accordance with the Council's Statement of Community Involvement. Chair, that concludes my report, and I would draw Cabinet's attention to the recommendations which are set out in Section 8. Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Can I invite Councillor Elizabeth Scott, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Economy and Partnerships, to speak to the report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Members will recall that the County Durham Plan was adopted in October 2020. However, that was not the end of the story, and we're now bringing forward a number of documents over the next few years which will supplement its content. The Development Viability, Affordable Housing and Financial Contributions SPD will ensure that we secure the contributions from developers to make certain that we have the infrastructure required to support new development. The Housing Needs SPD will help us meet the different housing needs of our residents. The County Durham Design Code SPD fulfills the requirement to prepare a design guide code as set out in the National Planning Policy Framework and will be one of the first in the country. The Trees, Woodland and Hedges SPD will help protect our important trees, woodlands and hedges and support their contribution to the county's biodiversity. As a council, we always emphasise the importance of consultation, and we will therefore be seeking views on these documents for 6 weeks up until the 11th of April 2023 to inform their final content. I therefore propose the recommendations in paragraph 8 of the report and thank the staff for all of the hard work that's gone into the preparation of these documents.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Can I invite Councillor James Rowlandson, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Resources, Investments and Assets, to speak to the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. These documents considered today give additional detail and clarity on what is required for new development to be acceptable, expanding on the policies of the County Durham Plan and providing certainty for developers and reassurance for residents. I therefore second the recommendations in paragraph 8 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, James. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the report? Yeah, Councillor Wilkes.
Thanks, Chair. I sat on planning committees for, well, best part of a decade. Frequently when you're there, you don't necessarily have all the information that you'd really like, and these SPDs are really important to make sure that councillors and the public can be sure that we've got really positive, robust planning regulations. And there's a huge amount of work being done by officers, and I applaud them for that work. As the Neighbourhoods and Climate Change Portfolio Holder, I just want to highlight and emphasise to the public that within this you've got a lot of work and a lot of proposals on green infrastructure, on biodiversity net gain, and with the trees, woodland and hedges element, you've got protection of ancient woodland and looking at what happens on new developments. And it's really important that people contribute to these consultations, because at a later date, these are the documents that will be used to protect our natural environment. So I'd urge everybody to read them and to contribute, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Okay, can we agree the report and its recommendations? Okay, I can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. Item 8, Public Space Protection Order, Aggressive Begging in Durham City. Can I ask Alan Patrickson, the Corporate Director of Neighbourhoods and Climate Change, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report provides the outcome of a consultation exercise carried out in relation to a potentially new Public Space Protection Order, or PSPO, for aggressive begging in Durham City, and to make a recommendation for next steps. In March 2022, Cabinet agreed to a consultation exercise to consider public and partner views on whether a PSPO should be introduced to control aggressive begging in the city centre. A PSPO can, in some instances, be an effective tool to tackle antisocial type behaviour in areas where it's been evidenced that a persistent and ongoing problem that is having an adverse impact on residents, businesses and visitors exists. An order can only be introduced by a local authority if it is satisfied on a reasonable grounds that the relevant legal conditions are met, including that there is evidence that it's likely that the activities will be carried out in a public place, that the activities are of a persistent and continuing nature, such as to make the activities unreasonable, and that a PSPO will be effective against them. One feature of a PSPO above other forms of bylaw, which is often seen as an advantage, is that an instant enforcement is available to authorities by way of a fixed penalty notice. A public consultation exercise was carried out to seek and welcome views on the subject, and this included all relevant partners, including Durham Constabulary, Durham BID and the City Parish Council, alongside residents groups and the general public. A summary of the consultation responses is attached to the report in Appendix 2. The response to the consultation was mixed, and while many agreed that a PSPO would be an effective way to control aggressive begging in the city, there were also mixed views on whether the introduction of a PSPO for begging would be an effective or a necessary move, with some responding that other issues in the city should be a priority. More crucially, however, what failed to emerge from the consultation was firm and direct evidence of the problem that the PSPO would remedy. And while there was some anecdotal information available, the size and the scale and the nature of the problem was not confirmed or identified. In addition, the introduction of a PSPO of this nature poses a risk for the authority, as it could be interpreted as introducing a financial punishment to those most vulnerable in our communities, although we have been clear throughout the process that this was not the case. It's often a misconception that aggressive beggars are homeless people, and often this is the impression that they intend to give. However, it is reported that this is not always the case, and some aggressive beggars coming into the city purely for financial reasons. The Council offers an effective and a valued service working with rough sleepers and those genuinely in need, and this service will continue unaffected by this consultation. In conclusion, although it's clear from the feedback that there are certain individuals in the city whose behaviour causes concern, and also that there may be instances of begging and potentially aggressive begging in the city, when considering the legal requirements needed to satisfy the introduction of an order, at this stage there is insufficient evidence to support the introduction of the PSPO to supplement the existing powers of the authority and the police. The Council will continue to work with our existing enforcement powers and our partners across the city to provide effective action against antisocial behaviour, while also providing support and education to those in need, and also education to members of the public. And a multi-agency group will be convened to ensure activities are joined up in this respect. Chair, the recommendations are in paragraph 5.
Thanks, Alan. Can I invite Councillor John Shuttleworth, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Rural Communities and Highways, to speak to the report, please?
Thanks, Chair. Our community safety efforts and the fight against antisocial behaviour are priorities for this Council and our partners. Through the work of the Safe Durham Partnership, the Durham City Safety Group and many other operational groups, we work together with stakeholders and partners to keep our county safe. As part of this work, it is vital that we examine every tool available to us collectively and explore where benefits can be found. It is in this spirit that we consulted on the PSPO for Durham City. It is equally vital, of course, to listen to the results of that consultation, to review the legal positions and to get the best advice available. This too we have done in this instance, taking the time to fully review the consultation feedback in the context of the city and the potential enforcement regime. The outcome is that we are not in a position to take this order forward at this time. However, that does not mean that we leave the issue unaddressed, and the report refers to the positive work that our homeless support teams and our enforcement teams do in the city in support of residents already. This will not diminish, and as a result of this decision, we will continue to use the existing powers wherever necessary. There are strong views on both sides of the issue, as we have seen through the consultation, but it's our role to make the right decision based on the evidence available, and that's exactly what we've done. On that basis, I move the report, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Can I invite Councillor Alan Shield, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Equality and Inclusion, to speak to the report?
Thank you, Chair. We are all well aware that antisocial behaviour is consistently one of the main reasons and concerns of residents, not only across County Durham, not only across the region, but across the country as well. It is important, therefore, that we do everything we can to act within the powers and resources that we have at our disposal to tackle the problem. In this spirit, it is absolutely the correct thing to do to consult on this proposed measure for the City of Durham. But just as it is right that we explore these ideas, it is also essential that we listen to consultation feedback and work within the guidance and the letter of the law that is set out for us, and this is exactly what we have done. This report, in my view, does not set out any negative aspects. It sets out a positive outcome gained from due process. Let me be clear, we're a listening council, both officers and members. It is also important for me that we always bear in mind that enforcement is not the only approach to solving any problem, whether related to antisocial behaviour or any other issue. It is extremely encouraging that this report refers to the ongoing work that our teams do in providing support to those who genuinely find themselves in need, on the streets or homeless. This report sets out in the positive ways of addressing the issue and identifies the need for an intelligent-led, evidence-based approach to this important but potentially sensitive issue. Chair, I second the report.
Thanks, Alan. Is there anyone else wishing to speak to the report, please? Okay, can we agree the report and its recommendations? Okay, I can confirm the recommendations are agreed. Item 9, review of home to school transport services consultation. This is a joint report, so can I ask Martin Stenton, Head of Early Help, Inclusion and Vulnerable Children, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. This report covers our home to school transport services and some proposed public consultation. The local authority has a statutory duty to provide home to school transport to children and young people who meet entitlement criteria, which is set out in DfE statutory guidance and in the Council's home to school transport policy. We currently provide transport to around 9,000 children and young people. We've got over 1,000 contracts in place and around 300 transport providers, so it is a very big undertaking for the county. The service was externally reviewed in 2021 and a range of potential efficiencies and positive opportunities for transformation were identified. Some of those included promoting the independence of young people through a range of travel options, supporting more children to attend local schools, addressing inequities in the offer, removing some of the legacy issues to move more in line with what other local authorities are providing, and ensuring that value for money for council taxpayers in the way that transport is provided. The need for us to move forward with a service transformation programme has intensified over the last 12 months with escalating cost pressures and further demands on the home to school transport budget. The year-end expenditure forecast for 22-23 is currently over £24 million, which is around £5 million over the original budget. We're also projecting some additional expenditure next year, and that was covered in the budget report earlier. The increases are due to a number of factors. They include increasing contract prices, inflation and energy costs, as well as increasing demand, especially in relation to transport for children with special educational needs and disabilities, where contracts have increased by almost a third since 2019. This report sets out a programme of priority areas for development which can improve independence and confidence of young people, continue to meet their identified needs and achieve efficiencies in the delivery of our services. The proposals will not impact on the Council's statutory duties for transport to eligible children to school. It's therefore proposed to undertake a public consultation on the home to school transport service, and that's set out in detail in the report. If agreed, the consultation would take place between the 27th of February and the 9th of April. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Martin. Can I invite Councillor Ted Henderson, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Children and Young People, to speak to the report, please?
Home school transport is a vital service that we supply to the families to ensure that the children and young people can attend school in a safe way. It is a complex operation that involves delivering over 1,000 transport routes and working with 300 contract suppliers. However, growing demand and inflation have seen the cost of the service rise to £24.3 million this year, which is 4.8 million over the budget, with a further increase of 4.8 million forecast for next year. The County Council has a duty to provide free transport to children and young people who meet national criteria, and currently our policy goes beyond that. We must look at the sustainability of the service and explore the opportunities to ensure value for what we spend whilst meeting the children's needs. The proposals in the report set out a range of options to change our policy, which are supportive of the Council's environmental policies, meet identified needs of young people, support the independence of young people where appropriate, are efficient and deliver value for money. The consultation will ensure a full programme of engagement. Those who may be affected have an opportunity to give their views. These views will be considered and reported to the Cabinet in the summer. I therefore propose that the recommendations in paragraph 15 of the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Ted. Can I invite Councillor Elizabeth Scott, Cabinet Portfolio Holder for Economy and Partnerships, to speak to the report?
Thank you, Chair. The report being considered today provides a clear overview of the challenges being experienced in providing home-to-school transport in County Durham. Challenges which are not unique to Durham and are being experienced by all councils across the country. These have escalated over the last 12 months due to the lasting impact of COVID-19 and other world events. There has been a real impact on transport providers, especially in relation to the recruitment and retention of drivers and the impact of escalating operating costs due to inflation and energy prices. It is important that this review links into our broader strategy for public transport provision across the county, such as the Bus Service Improvement Plan. The proposals in the report represent a balanced programme of options to ensure we continue to comply with our statutory duties while consulting on those aspects of provision which we may be able to do differently and make more efficient. I therefore second the recommendations in paragraph 15 of the report.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Is there any other Cabinet members wish to speak? Yeah, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. As I mentioned in item 4, the budget report, home to school transport has seen increasing demand and price pressures which have significantly raised our spending, and we're now forecasting that expenditure next year will be around 8.3 million more in 23-24 than in this year. Obviously, these increases put a lot of pressure on the overall council budgets, and the report sets out proposals for consultation which will help to tackle increasing levels of expenditure and try and ensure value for money for our council taxpayers. So as portfolio holder for finance, I support the recommendations at paragraph 15. Thank you.
Is any other Cabinet members wish to speak? Okay, can we agree the report and its recommendations? Okay, thanks. Can confirm that the recommendations are agreed. Item 10 is any other business. I haven't been notified of any other business, so I'd like to thank everyone for taking part, and to those members of the public and media who've watched the meeting online and in person. That concludes the business for this meeting.